Good afternoon. My name is Kate Shank, and I'm the Deputy Director of Legal Aid Chicago. Welcome to Legal Aid Chicago's fourth session of our series, The Emerging Legal Crisis Facing Chicago's Black and Brown Communities. Today's session will focus on workers' rights. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. First is Elise Sawyers, who's our Chief Executive Officer of Community Health Partnership of Illinois. We also have Dolores Ayala, who's a supervisory attorney in our Immigrants and Workers Rights Practice group here at Legal Aid Chicago, and Lauren Dana, who's a staff attorney also in the Immigration and Workers Rights Practice group at Legal Aid Chicago.
So I'll just get us started. Elise is going to talk to you all today about all of the great work of her organization, the Community Health Partnership of Illinois, which serves migrant agricultural workers by providing outreach and health services across the state of Illinois. And we partner frequently with CHP in order to serve this population, which is also our client population in the Migrant Project. As Kate mentioned, my name is Lauren Dana. I'm a staff attorney in our Immigrants and Workers Rights Practice group. I'm specifically in our Illinois Legal Assistance Migrant Project, where we provide a variety of services to migrant agricultural workers. So I'm going to be talking to you today about the work that we do and what issues we've seen facing essential workers that are agricultural workers across the state of Illinois. And then my colleague Dolores will talk to you a bit more about another worker population that her employment team serves, low-wage workers, also essential workers, and what they've been doing to assist folks over the last several months. So, but before I get started, I did just want to set a little bit of a framework for my comments and thinking about, a common theme that I think has emerged over the course of this series, which is that the disparate impact of COVID-19 on Black and Brown communities has really just highlighted the injustices that these communities were already facing as a result of systems rooted in the exploitation of Black Americans and the need for reform to shift and change those systems. And this includes the historical discrimination of agricultural workers. For example, federal labor protective laws enacted in the 1930s, including the minimum wage and the right to unionize, excluded farm workers in order to appease Southern farmers whose employees were predominantly Black. And so for years and years, agricultural workers have been written out of protections, out of the laws deliberately. And today this continues. The federal government designates farm workers, mostly people of color, as essential workers, and yet federal labor laws still discriminate against them. Our Migrant Project aims to empower migrant and seasonal farm workers by providing comprehensive legal services on a range of issues as they navigate these exploitative systems. We represent farm workers primarily in federal litigation as well as advocacy before local, state, and federal agencies. We also do extensive outreach and rights trainings throughout the state, for example, on issues like the public charge rule and pesticide exposure and safety and risks. And we're often visiting farm workers at their housing locations or through community partners that engage with them. And as I mentioned, we cover the whole state of Illinois, all the way down to the Carbondale area at the southern part of our state. So the point of this outreach is to let folks know that they have rights and that we're here if they need legal assistance. And this is a major component of our work without which there would be no representation just due to the nature of this population. We have thousands of farm workers here in Illinois working on crops across the state, primarily corn and soybeans. We're also the #1 producer of pumpkins, if you didn't know, and horseradish. And we have all kinds of other specialty crops that folks are working on across the state. And then another piece of our work now is a COVID-19 response. And so we've been doing a lot of work with Elise's organization and other community partners in order to address the unique vulnerabilities of this population during the pandemic. But the unique vulnerabilities of migrant farm workers isn't something that's new or a result of COVID-19 itself. This is a population that is isolated by nature. They live and work under the radar, housed often by their employer in tight quarters and out of the way by design. And so the issues that arise out of this, the fact that they are so isolated, is lack of access to or awareness of benefits and resources, including legal assistance, and little oversight or accountability. The population also experiences a severe power imbalance. So power is centralized with the employer, who has the power to recruit, hire, fire, house, pay, blacklist, and retaliate against workers. In particular, H-2A workers, which are foreign workers here on a temporary work visa, their visa is tied to their employer. So let's say that they aren't being paid their wages, or their workplace isn't safe, or they're not getting enough food or water during their supposed to be provided by the employer. If they leave, they're afraid that they'll lose their status. They're afraid that they'll be blacklisted and not be able to work with that employer again, and afraid that they'll be deported. And so they stay despite really deplorable conditions oftentimes. Other issues that arise out of this severe power imbalance are things like wage theft, retaliation, like I said, workplace health and safety issues, housing and field conditions, and when the conditions are really severe, human trafficking or labor trafficking, and possibly sex trafficking. Finally, it's also a really dangerous profession. As you can imagine, this is tough manual labor. Folks are doing this work in extreme conditions for very long hours, and are putting themselves at risk of pesticide exposure, workplace injuries, and often face lack of basic necessities like water or a bathroom. And so those are the existing aspects, factors of migrant and seasonal farm workers already. As I just discussed, they're uniquely vulnerable to exploitation and workplace abuses. They're low-wage workers, so even if they're paid the minimum wage, it's really not much more. Most are living in poverty and super reliant on this income, afraid of retaliation, and they're also seasonal workers. And so a lot of our clients lost work due to the pandemic as well, even before this season started, to the point that they were having to borrow from family members just to buy food and pay for gas to get to work, to their agricultural work over the summer, and waiting for their first paycheck. The population includes domestic and foreign workers, and documented and undocumented workers. So documented workers include citizens, residents, also undocumented folks. We have a lot of clients that come from Texas, and where we've seen, really high COVID-19 rates, and then a hurricane. So it's been an especially difficult time for those clients, those folks. As I mentioned, we also see foreign workers on H-2A visas. Many are coming from Mexico, but they come from all over the world. And, this population has been facing emergency rules allowing workers to stay and to work, and exceptions to H-2A, to the traditional rules, in order to keep them here, available and working during this difficult time. And then, as I mentioned, farm workers are designated as essential workers. And so they have continued working despite the risks to themselves and their families and their coworkers. And now this already vulnerable population is also uniquely vulnerable to COVID-19. And so what makes farm workers especially at risk during this pandemic? I touched on a couple of these already, but one major component is that they live and work in shared, crowded facilities. If any of you caught the CBS Frontline article that we sent around, there's also a documentary that's been published, and that gives some great footage to see sort of what it looks like in the day of a farm worker. But they're living in housing that is super cramped and shared. So often they're sharing room with several other workers. They may have to share a bed with another worker, and they're living in close quarters. You'll see in a little bit some photos of how close those quarters really are. They're being transported to work every day in a bus, so also close quarters, and they often work in groups. And so this living and working in these shared crowd facilities, obviously in the time of COVID, means that they are super susceptible to this contagious virus. As I mentioned, these folks are also isolated, so they don't have local ties, and they're disconnected from communities. So they, have limited access to resources, limited access to education, and if there are any issues or an outbreak, unless it's being reported by a worker or the employer, no one else might know. And then they also have super limited access to medical care. So these workers are often uninsured. They often have, no sick leave, and they work really long hours in remote and rural locations. And so, they don't have the means to access healthcare. And even if they did have the means to access that care, when would they go? Many work 6 days a week, if not 7. And their work hours can go all the way up to 12 hours. They're starting their workday when they get up at 4 a.m. to be ready at 5 a.m. for the bus to get to the field at 6 a.m. and start their work when the sun goes up. And they're working all the way through the evening. They take the bus ride back to their housing, and then they're showering and maybe cooking food for their family. And it really doesn't leave much time. So as the pandemic has progressed, though, what we have seen is that the pandemic really is hitting the farm worker community especially hard, as we imagined it might, due to these unique vulnerabilities of just the way that they live and work, just by nature of what they do. And although they are essential workers, and despite these unique factors that make farm workers especially vulnerable during COVID-19, they have no enforceable federal protections. Which, as you can imagine, given the power imbalance that I described that is inherent in agricultural work, this is incredibly problematic. And so what we're seeing are that there are no enforceable federal protections, no enforceable safety regulations. So none have come in response to designating these workers as essential. None have come in response to an understanding of the high risk of this population during COVID-19. And it's really just being left up to the employer. Agencies like OSHA have been silent until they finally issued some guidance in June of this year alongside the CDC to help encourage some safety protocols. However, without an agency willing to advocate for the rights of workers, without a private right of action to enforce their rights under OSHA, the way that the system is built really fuels power imbalance and undercuts any safety measures that the law provides, let alone any unenforceable, not required, suggested guidance, which is all that we have at this point. And what we've seen is a disproportionate impact of COVID, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 really highlights the existing exploitative systems, as I sort of alluded to in the beginning of my presentation. And so agricultural exemptions, leaving workers out of any protections, many are not covered by leave laws that have, been passed as emergency rules and aren't being provided with any enforceable protections as they work and risk their lives and their families' lives and their coworkers' lives. It highlights also the unenforceability of existing protections. So even when there are protections in place, for example, these guidelines, as much as the state may, encourage them, if it's not enforceable, there's really little likelihood that an employer will take on the responsibility of providing safety measures for these workers. And it highlights again the power imbalance. What happens when a worker tests positive? Will they be unpaid while they're in quarantine? Will they be isolated properly while they're in quarantine? Will they be provided for, or will they have to go without food because there is no accountability and no one knows about what's happening? Will they be forced to work and not allowed to quarantine when they're ill and then put others at risk? It's just a really difficult situation when there aren't any regulations and really little oversight. But luckily, with partnerships like ours with CHP and a lot of work that the state has been doing, we have been able to work to bridge some of these access gaps, access to resources, to medical care. Our partnerships with these health providers have been invaluable over the course of the summer. I tried to stress to you just the importance of doing outreach in order to reach this population, which is so isolated and really doesn't know that it has rights or doesn't know how to get help otherwise, because they're living and working, you know, on property or at the hands of the employer. And during the summer, it's been really difficult for us to be able to get out and reach these workers. And so we have been relying really heavily on our health partners who are doing the important work on the ground of getting to workers and giving them COVID-19 instruction and education and providing them with supplies. And we've been able to provide them with our outreach materials, which have included this year, luckily, some bandanas that they've been able to use as face coverings. And I think you'll see in some of these pictures, it's included our flyers, sunscreen, little first aid kits. So all kinds of things that they can use to help them while they're working and that have our information on them so they can reach us if they need help. And then in addition to conducting all of this outreach in partnership with CHP and another health services organization, Shawnee Health Services, they've also been doing a lot of mobile testing that Elise will talk more about, and just making sure that folks get the care that they need. And what's been so important about this partnership is that CHP is able to let us know about what things look like on the ground and where they might identify any issues. And so by getting workers to our information, we can just make sure that we address their needs and make sure there's accountability so that when workers do fall ill, they're connected with local county health departments and they're able to you know, really have that accountability, and the state can go in, IDPH or the Department of Labor can go in and double check that workers are doing okay during this time. We've also collaborated with state and local entities in order to you know, provide information on what could be the best practices during this time. Agricultural work is a difficult type of work to enforce things like social distancing and the other safety precautions that we know are so key to preventing the spread of COVID-19, and if it does spread, preventing further outbreak. And so being able to provide the materials that were developed at the state level to organizations like CHP and Shawnee Health Services and other state and other partners across the state has helped to connect workers to what government agencies can do to enforce some labor laws and some safety regulations. And so we're super grateful for that partnership to be able to reach our clients, and we're hopeful that we can continue to sort of address these issues as they face us, and you know, bring our expertise to the forefront. And before I conclude my remarks, I do just want to touch on some immigration issues. You know, not all farm workers, as I mentioned, are immigrants, but some are. And in general, just as with the migrant farm worker population, there are some inherent challenges, additional challenges that they face by nature of being immigrants. And I kind of touched on some of these, but these include fear of retaliation, fear of deportation, and confusion around the public charge rule. So these have been especially prevalent over the last several months. And then what our immigration team, as well as our migrant team, have noticed over the last few months and have been working to respond to are some really drastic policy changes by the agency, USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which processes applications for immigration remedies or relief, including U visas, VAWA, T visas. These are humanitarian visas for survivors of crimes or survivors of human trafficking, like the clients that we serve. And some of these policy changes include rejecting valid fee waivers and really drastic fee increases that are preventing folks from will be preventing folks from being able to apply for remedies that they're eligible for. Really stringent application reviews, denying applications for failing to place an N/A in a blank space. Even when the applicant isn't able to change a form that has been issued by another agency. And then finally, requests for additional evidence to support claims that previously would have been approved. Where there has been sufficient evidence in the past, today it's not enough without any concrete changes. Just this really drastic policy changes, stacking up more and more barriers and making it more and more difficult for folks to access relief that they are eligible for. And so I just, want to reiterate, if you haven't had a chance to check out the PBS Frontline news article and the accompanying documentary that we sent around, I highly encourage it. I think it was really well done and gives you just a glimpse into what a day looks like, what the risks look like, and really the fears that these folks are feeling. It's a national conversation, and it's happening in Illinois as well. And so we're super grateful, as I mentioned, to our partnership with CHP, and I'm excited to hear Elise tell us a little bit more about their work more specifically, and then you'll hear from Dolores and the work that her employment team has been doing to face this unprecedented time in employment and unemployment law.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about CHP and what we've done in the community and continue to do in the community. So like many other health centers or healthcare organizations, we had to move swiftly to come back and respond to COVID-19. My name is Elise Sawyers. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Community Health Partnership of Illinois. I joined this organization January of this year, and here comes COVID-19, had to respond differently there as well. So I work for a federally qualified health center, one that was put in place more than 55 years ago to not only be located in areas of high need to serve the underserved and uninsured population. We offer comprehensive medical, dental, and behavioral health services. We're open to everyone, regardless of ability to pay. And majority of the patient population that we serve in central and northern Illinois are mostly migrants. So over 69% of our population are from the LatinX community, and we uniquely receive funding from the federal government to serve this population. Next slide, please. So just a bit about health centers. There's over 1,400 health centers, more than 50 in Illinois, been put in place for over 55 years to make sure we increase access to care and make sure we turn no one away who are not able to provide or to pay for medical services. We have 6 locations. We operate from 37 counties we go into in terms of doing outreach. We have stabilized location in 6 counties, as you can see from the locations on the screen: Harvard, Mendota, Princeville, Champaign, Kankakee, and Aurora. Today we have, and have always for the last 20 years, been going to farm owners, employers, we're growers, we're workers, we're migrant workers, or house or work, just to make sure we see the population and make sure that they understand that we are here to provide primary health care, to close disparities within the community where health is concerned, and to also support any one of our patients with any other social service needs. In 2019, we serve over 10,000 patients. Again, more than 60% of our population is the Latinx community and migrants. We also serve domestic farm workers, but we have a unique program that is geared to our migrant seasonal farm workers. With respect to outreach, we quickly launched COVID testing. We have always partnered with community partners and healthcare organization and health departments to lease/borrow their vehicles, get into the community, as most of our sites are very rural, and make sure that we provide primary, not only medical, dental care, and as recent of this year, also doing some mobile behavioral health. With partners like Legal Aid Chicago, we're able to enhance a lot of our education programs, get into the work location, get into the housing locations of our migrants. And with additional partnership with the state of Illinois, we're able to test and provide COVID-19 testing and utilize state labs to get our results, continue to educate our patient and provide them the guidance and services that they need, especially our patients that were found positive. So what does it look like in terms of outreach for CHP? We have a great, unique program inclusive of what we call a promotoris de salud. In terms of what does that mean? The promotoris de salud that is added to our outreach program is from either the migrant or farm worker community. They're better able or best able to speak the language, do the interpretation, and link potential patients, incoming migrants to care, to CHP, and any other service needs in the community. So our team comprised of a nurse practitioner, a nurse, a medical assistant, a promotorist de salud, whose responsibility is to get into the community, get into the rural areas, identify migrants coming to town, work with local, statewide representatives, and make sure that we are aware around the schedule of migrants coming into the state, where they will be located, and really make sure we let them know that we are here for medical services. As it relates to COVID-19, we're also making sure now our traditional outreach is inclusive of testing. So we have a schedule, we know where the migrants are, when they're coming, where they will be located, where they're housed, and we have partnerships with the employers. We collaborate on scheduling, we get into parking lots, we get into the fields, and we carry out testing. Again, Legal Aid of Chicago, over 20 years of relationships with this organization, has added so much value to our team. From time to time, and prior to or pre-COVID-19, we have an attorney in our buildings that is readily available to provide any kind of legal question, answer, or services to our patient population. We, as an organization, we operate on what we call a sliding fee scale. So any one of the migrants or any underserved, uninsured community resident that seeks out our care can come to us for as little as $20 to see a primary care provider. And if they don't have it, we turn no one away. In addition to that, when we collaborate with organizations like Legal Aid Chicago, these are free services as well. We find that, like you heard Lauren mention, this population cannot afford the services that they truly need. So we are here as organization providing medical services without the stress, legal service referrals with the collaborations with Legal Aid Chicago. And we have other organizations that we partner with as well that we can refer patients to, whether it be for food stamp, other nutritional needs, to bridge the gap on other social determinants of health. So great partnership. I'm happy to be here to share with you and the team from Legal Aid Chicago about what we do and how we've done it. As of last week, we've tested over 1,600 patients. We have a positive rate right now of 4%, depending on what field or what housing location we've gone to. When we started testing, our rates were like 33%, majority Latinx patients. Today, we're very happy to say we're mirroring what the state is seeing, 4%, sometimes 0 in some locations. So it's very critical to get the testing done, very critical to have organizations like Legal Aid Chicago advocate for housing and proper social distancing and aggressive marketing on just hygiene, wash your hands, practice social distancing as much as you can. We've borrowed and shared materials. We're bringing the same messaging to not only the employers, but the employees, the workers as well. So I want to thank you so much for having us today. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may have as it relates to medical services and COVID-related challenges or concerns and services that we've been offering to this community. Thank you. I now would like to introduce Dana.
Elise?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Elise, thank you so much for your remarks, and we're so happy to have you here. And at this point, I did just want to let folks know who are seeking CLE credit that you need to make note of this code. The code is CLA9220. Again, the code is CLA9220. The code can also be found in the chat box. Just want to make sure y'all caught that so you can get your CLE credit. give you a moment to note it down. Great, and so next I'd like to introduce my colleague Dolores, who's going to talk to you, as I mentioned, about the work that her employment team has been doing during this unprecedented time of unemployment and assisting workers as they think about going back to work.
Hi everyone, I'm Dolores Ayala, and today I'm going to talk about some of the ways that the pandemic has disrupted and in countless cases devastated something we all depend on for our survival, our livelihoods. Whether it has hit you personally or a friend or a loved one, no one has escaped the reality that we are facing the highest level of unemployment since record keeping began. And because we are unique among industrialized nations in that our healthcare is tied to our unemployment, when we hear from workers who've lost their jobs, we also hear their fears about what is going to happen if they need to see a doctor. When it comes to unemployment benefits, my team has faced the demoralizing task of telling clients over and over that we just don't know why the Illinois Department of Employment Security has not responded yet. And we just don't know when they can expect to receive the benefits they've heard about in the news. And finally, though it's certainly not unique during the pandemic, but perhaps exacerbated by it, unlawful practices like wage theft and discrimination are on the rise. There's a stunning contradiction between our society's dependence on essential workers and how those workers are treated. The work may be essential, but in case after case, we see Black and brown workers who are not treated as if they and their rights in the workplace are essential at all. Take wage theft. The precarious job market means that low-wage Black and brown workers face exploitative practices, like paying less than minimum wage, refusing to pay overtime, pressuring workers to work off the clock, or just straight up stiffing workers after they've completed a day's or even a week's labor. How do they get away with it? Exploitation works when there is an imbalance of power. So it's not surprising to see that Black, LatinX, and immigrant workers, especially women, are the primary targets. The tactics used, paying in cash, paying a weekly flat rate, maintaining no records, create ambiguity around what was owed, what was paid, leaving workers feeling powerless. And the problem is made worse as workers now fear retaliation for complaining more than ever before. The employment team at Legal Aid Chicago counters the imbalance of power with knowledge of the law. We've obtained relief for clients like Anna, a certified nursing assistant who worked at a nursing care facility. Anna regularly clocked out per management's direction for an unpaid half-hour lunch break. During this time, however, she was required to keep a two-way radio on her person and respond to calls from residents of the assisted living department. Though required to by law, her employer did not compensate her for this time. After preparing a complaint for violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act, we were able to obtain a settlement for Anna to compensate her for her lost wages and for other relief available under these laws. Discrimination. Discrimination at work comes in many shapes and sizes. There is discrimination that is open and direct. A person's race, color, national origin, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, age, disability. These are called protected classes under the anti-discrimination laws, and this discrimination is called disparate treatment. Then there's discrimination resulting from a practice or policy that is neutral on its face, but has a disparate impact upon members of a particular group. The use of criminal background checks in hiring is a good example. Although an employer may have a neutral policy of excluding applicants based on certain criminal conduct, these policies have been found to disproportionately impact Black and brown workers because Black and Latino men are arrested and incarcerated at a rate that is 2 to 3 times their proportion of the general population. Then there's harassment and hostile work environment. Harassment is a form of discrimination. It happens when, on account of the victim's membership in a protected class, the victim experiences unwanted, uninvited, unwelcome behavior that demeans, threatens, or offends them, resulting in a hostile or abusive environment. Legally, a hostile work environment is created when the harassment, based on membership in a protected class, has become severe or pervasive and interferes with a worker's ability to do their job. When it comes to sexual harassment, the law identifies 2 kinds: quid pro quo, this for that, favor for a favor, and hostile work environment based on sex, sexual advances, comments, innuendos, unwanted touching. We've even seen sexual assault. There are many anti-discrimination laws and a variety of avenues that the employment team uses to advocate for our clients at Legal Aid Chicago. The most common are listed here. During the pandemic, the employment team has doubled its intake for clients seeking help with their claims for unemployment benefits. The landscape has changed dramatically as the Illinois Department of Employment Security was overwhelmed at the beginning with claims, but has continued to operate in a way that can only be described as dysfunctional. The CARES Act was signed into law on March 27, 2020. It expands states' ability to provide unemployment insurance to many workers affected by COVID-19, including people who aren't ordinarily eligible for unemployment benefits, like those who are self-employed, gig workers, part-time workers, independent contractors. The $600 weekly federal benefit expired on July 31st this year, and to date has not been renewed or replaced. One of the programs under the CARES Act, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA, expands eligibility due to special circumstances arising from COVID-19. Some of those circumstances include you've been diagnosed with COVID-19 or you have symptoms of it and you're trying to get diagnosed, a member of your household has been diagnosed, you're providing care for someone who's been diagnosed, you're providing care for a child or other household member who can't go to school or to a care facility because it's closed. Maybe you've been quarantined or advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. Maybe you were scheduled to start a job and you no longer have the job or you can't reach the job due to COVID-19. Or you had to quit your job as a result, or your place of employment is closed as a direct result of COVID-19. Non-US citizens are eligible for unemployment under certain circumstances. First, they must have valid work authorization. So this means that undocumented workers are not eligible for unemployment. Second, only certain immigration statuses qualify: lawful permanent residents and those permanently residing under color of law, PRUCOL. Refugees and those granted asylum are eligible, and we believe that these immigration statuses should be eligible as well. Before the pandemic, for applying for unemployment benefits and for appealing a denial of benefits was straightforward. It is summarized here. We are now operating in a new reality, however, and the process is no longer clear and certainly not straightforward. Many of our clients have waited weeks and even months to receive their benefits. As I've said, the number of clients seeking help with unemployment claims has increased dramatically. Through June of this year, our team operated an unemployment helpline to assist callers as they tried to navigate their ways through the system. We've continued to assist clients appeal the denial of benefits and have had numerous successes, resulting in clients receiving the benefits they deserved. We've mediated and settled discrimination claims, wage claims, and obtained well-deserved settlements for our clients. And as we advise clients on their rights in the workplace, we make sure they know that we are always here to act as their advocates.
Thank you so much, Dolores. Really appreciate your presentation. And now I want to turn it over to Melissa Petrola, who is our Director of Volunteer Services.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Dolores. The work that you and your team are doing to help clients navigate so much uncertainty is such important advocacy during this time. And there are so many situations in our justice system where our clients are faced with a daunting system, and advocates are essential to helping to bridge that gap. For those of you who may want to help do that, I am going to highlight some of the ways that you can get involved in Legal Aid Chicago's work. At Legal Aid Chicago, we have over 20 different volunteer opportunities across the agency. Our volunteers work alongside us to help meet the needs of our clients and are essential to helping us achieve our mission of bringing about justice for all. You can see on this slide the impact our volunteers made in 2019 alone. We have a variety of opportunities available, offering everything from a commitment of a couple hours at a desk to a longer term representation. And many of our opportunities are now fully remote. We have opportunities that span our practice groups and our subject matters. One particular opportunity that I would like to take the time to highlight is the Federal Court Pro Se Help Desk, which is physically located in the Dirksen Federal Courthouse, but has gone fully remote and is a brief service shift-based opportunity. At that desk, we advise clients about process and federal procedure in cases in which they are representing themselves, so federal cases in which they do not have an attorney. Many of those cases are related to employment, including employment discrimination claims and other claims. The client demand at this desk exceeds the appointments that we have available. So we need more volunteers. And if you have federal court experience, I encourage you to help us help clients navigate the federal court system and provide a truly essential service. You can find more information about all of our volunteer opportunities on our website. And you are welcome to reach out to me with any questions that you have about any of our opportunities and how you may be able to help. And so I'll turn it back over to Kate Schenk now.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you again to Elise and Dolores and Lauren for those terrific presentations. Particular thanks to Elise for joining us today. This concludes the planned content of today's presentation. But in a moment, we're going to start the Q&A portion. Before we begin that part, though, I'd like to give a quick reminder about our Relay for Justice, which began on Monday. It's not too late to join us. We are collectively logging our miles by walking, running, biking, or swimming to travel together across the country with stops that mark vital moments in civil rights and civil justice history. You can learn more on our website, and I'll give my personal endorsement. It's a lot of fun and really interesting to see how far we're going so far. So the panelists are going to remain on to answer your questions, which you should type again into the Q&A in the bottom of your screen. I think we already have questions that have come in. So Dolores, could you please take us through the Q&A?
First question that I'm seeing, do you have satellite offices across the state to help these workers? And if not, could you partner with state union member groups to help with outreach to these workers?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start with that question. So we don't have any satellite offices for our migrant project, although we used to at some of the state migrant camps, but many have closed. However, we do work with our stakeholders located in the community to access farm workers, including Illinois Migrant Council and Migrant Education. So in addition to health partners, we're partnering with a lot of other organizations that are in the community in order to access workers. And then when we're doing this outreach, you know, we're heading all the way downstate, staying overnight, able to meet with workers before we come back up.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. The next question, can state regulation effect change, or is it preempted by federal law?
Yeah, so in terms of the enforceable protections that I was talking about, you know, they're not preempted. You know, we have a lot of state regulations that could come into play. We've seen some states that have been able to pass some regulations. For example, Wisconsin for a time had some regulations with supposedly enforceable protections, although the language of those safety protocols, you know, required measures taken to a reasonable degree. So still quite a gray area. But then what we saw was the Wisconsin Supreme Court knocked those down, so they were no longer in effect. We've also seen in Michigan some enforceable protections put into place to enforce testing of workers to ensure their safety and their health, and to prevent outbreaks in this, you know, area where outbreaks are so susceptible. But what we have seen is a backlash and sort of a twisting of a discrimination argument, saying that you know, this testing is unlawful. And so it's been really difficult. I think California may have also tried to pass some regulations. So yes, a lot of states are moving and trying to bring different pieces forward. We have state laws that aren't, you know, beyond just COVID. We have Illinois state wage laws, and those are enforceable and not preempted by federal laws, and a couple other examples. So certainly moves by the state would help and aren't preempted by federal regulations.
Okay, kind of a related question, I suppose. Are farm workers covered by the Workers' Compensation Act?
So they are. I mean, they can be. If they are otherwise eligible for workers' compensation, they certainly are covered by it. And maybe, Dolores, you can talk a little bit about this too, but one interesting component of workers' comp in COVID-19, as some of you might know, is you know, whether a worker could get workers' compensation for you know, illness or injury as a result of COVID-19. And there's been a lot of back and forth in the legislature about whether there would be a presumption towards providing workers' compensation to workers who are essential workers going to work every day and who you know, test positive and have COVID-19 and related illnesses.
Do documented farm workers here on a visa have any enforceable rights? Could they bring claims under the common law, breach of contract, negligence?
Yeah, so they certainly do. These workers have, you know, we've taken wage cases, immigration cases, for example, to assist them. And so, you know, when their, you know, employer isn't providing sort of their basic necessities, and that rises to the level of trafficking, for example, that person has, you know, a right to be able to be safe. And so we're able to take cases like those and enforce their wages and their safety. So certainly they do have enforceable rights, but it's a great question, and it's one that they have too, right? I'm not a citizen. I'm not from here. I don't live here. I must not have any rights or be covered. And so that's one of the biggest components of our outreach, is to try to communicate that they do. And they can also have contract claims as well.
Okay, the next question is, maybe it's the person asking says maybe not related, but is there any census outreach?
Yes, there's a lot of census outreach. I know that an organization called the Illinois Coalition of Immigrants Rights, I'm getting it wrong, but it's ICIRR, I-C-I-R-R. They've had a really thorough census outreach work across the state. Yeah.
Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, Lauren, you were almost there.
Thank you.
And what is the public charge rule?
All right, I'll do this one real quick. So when you apply to become a legal permanent resident through our immigration system, or when you apply for a visa to come into the United States, depending on the basis for your eligibility for that status, you may be subjected to a rule that is called the public charge rule, and it's an admissibility rule, and it is a basis on which you could be denied admission. So that's like a lawful entry, not physical entry, to have status in the United States. The rule used to be really, really narrow and only included some like long-term care at the hands of the government, or you know, reliance on, you know, or likely to become a public charge. I'm not recalling the exact language, but essentially over the last couple of years now, there have been rumors and then draft regulations and then past rules and then comments and then a final rule on how this rule would change. And essentially the administration has really broadened the rule in a way that it, you know, was never intended to be, in a sense that, you know, the effect has been that folks are really afraid to access any public benefits that they are eligible for, because they're afraid that it might impact their ability to apply to become a resident, or, you know, for other applications. And, you know, even though the rule only impacts some folks, really it's just immigrants across the board that have been really afraid to apply or to access benefits. And it's become especially interesting and really highlighted how problematic it is during COVID-19, when folks are really afraid to access healthcare, to access testing, even if that healthcare testing would be free. Even once the immigration agency announced that any benefits accessed in order to obtain care for COVID-19 would not be counted towards the public charge rule. It's essentially just been really confusing for folks, and they're afraid, and so they are taking the safest route, which is to not access care. And I know that that's something that CHP and other health services providers have really been facing, and so we've tried to do a lot of education around that to help folks understand how to make the best choice for themselves, and what the rule really means.
Okay. The next question is, does INS focus its enforcement on farm workers?
While we have not had specific cases of ICE focusing on farm workers, many are community members who live in our state's rural towns and may have been arrested by ICE outside of the knowledge of their work. You know, I think this is something that has come up in other areas, but it's not something that we have seen, especially here.
What are the sources of funding? The person asking the question says, I see CHP on one of the banners. What are the sources of funding?
Yeah, I think what's on the banner is CHIP, which is Medicaid for Kids. This is the Children's Health Insurance Plan. Our migrant project is primarily funded by the Legal Services Corporation, just as the agency as a whole is, as well as additional grants from places like the EPA to do pesticide safety work, and other, you know, other funders.
Okay, I see a question now that I think I'll answer, and that, oh, I just lost it. Give me 1 second. Here it is. The question is, are state legislative representatives and their staffs actively pressing IDES to improve its unemployment insurance performance? That is an excellent question. And the answer is sort of. I think that they're, well, I can't exactly speak for all of the state, you know, representatives, what they're doing and what they're pressuring. I don't know. We've been in communication with various people at IDES who have offered to help us, purported to help us, and the system has remained dysfunctional. The good news is, starting actually next week, we've got a new roundtable starting up with someone from, again, IDES, meeting with me and a few other people from other legal aid organizations to talk about and address the myriad problems facing applicants for unemployment insurance. The problems are everything from they can't get their application through to they've been denied benefits and they don't know why. In the old days, when your claim was adjudicated and you were denied benefits, you got what was called a determination, and the determination would state why you were denied the benefits, and our legal team would look at that and decide whether we agreed with that determination or whether we thought it was appealable. And many cases we appeal and prevail. But what we're not getting now are the determinations. And so if you don't really know what the determination is, you don't really know how to appeal. So it's just been I hate to be so down, but it's just been demoralizing for the whole team. So we'll go on to the next question. The person is asking, what is the unemployment hotline number, and is it limited to Chicago residents? So we operated the hotline until the end of June. We are not operating a hotline per se. However, we do, our intake is open. We've doubled our intake spots for people who have unemployment questions or issues. And so that can be reached just through the regular intake at Legal Aid Chicago. The next question. Thanks for this great presentation. I think I heard you say that federal worker protection laws do not apply to farm workers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that is correct. In a lot of our federal labor laws, there are specific exemptions for agricultural workers. So for example, in the Fair Labor Standards Act, farm workers aren't eligible for overtime pay. So although when it first passed in the 1930s, they weren't eligible for minimum wage, they are now able to make the minimum wage, but there is no overtime for these workers. So even though they're working 12 hours a day, it doesn't matter, no overtime. They're also not allowed to unionize. As I mentioned, that's been the case for a long time. And so, and there are a lot of other examples. There is a specific law that was meant to kind of help bridge some of these gaps, the Agricultural Worker Protection Act, AWPA, but again, the applicability is really difficult and tricky. It can be really tricky to enforce. And one interesting thing about representing migrant farm workers is they are migrant. It is seasonal work. So a lot of times they're passing through Illinois for a couple of months, and then they're going back to their home state or their home country. And so, you can represent them and enforce these rights. But, as you all know, litigation can really be time consuming, go on for a really long time. These workers are really reliant and dependent on their wages. And when it can take years, to get back the wages that were stolen, it just sometimes is a really impractical solution for workers. But yeah, a number of federal labor laws that leave agricultural workers out that have very specific exemptions.
Okay. The next question is, do caregivers have rights under this protection? And I guess I'm not sure which protection we might be talking about. I guess I don't know what to say. Caregivers who are I guess I'm just not too sure how to answer that question. maybe caregivers under the unemployment. Maybe that's probably what the person is asking. And the answer is yes. I mean, if you are providing care due to COVID, you've lost your job, you've had to leave your job because of that, then you are supposed to be eligible for PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. Okay, the next question is, does INS focus enforcement on employees?
I mean, I'm not sure exactly how to answer this one. I would certainly say that the trend is to, enforce immigration enforcement against employees over employers. And so employers, are using a number of undocumented workers. They know that they are, and really face no penalties. They're not, really discouraged from doing it. And there isn't a ton of enforcement, although it does happen. And I would say just that a lot more enforcement is against employees, or a lot more barriers are faced by employees. So even if it's not direct, ICE enforcement.
Okay. And I think the last question, is this for people who are having problems with contract work and not being paid? I am assuming that is an unemployment related question as well. I'm going to answer it as if it is. So one of the challenges that we have seen people face are what some people refer to as gig workers or independent contractors. So let's say you are primarily a musician and you work part-time as a bartender. So now you've lost your employment, you've lost your gig, and what you're supposed to be covered under PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or under regular state unemployment law, you wouldn't be, but under the CARES Act, you are. The problem is it's not being administered very effectively. And so we've seen a lot of people who should be getting pandemic unemployment assistance just simply not getting it. I shouldn't be so pessimistic. That we have seen people get it too. It's just that sometimes it takes such a long time before it finally comes through, and then obviously we hear from the people who are having problems. People who are not having problems don't call us to talk about unemployment. So hopefully I've answered that question. And that is the last question.
Thank you so much, Dolores, and to Lauren too, for answering all those terrific questions. Thank you for being with us here today. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to register for and join us for our upcoming presentations. The next one will be a week from today on Wednesday, September 9th at noon, and will focus on long-term care issues. Registration and information about this series is available on our website, legalaidchicago.org. Thank you again, and please enjoy the rest of your afternoon.